In it here now, what are you gonna do now? I'm gonna been on here now, who bid $500,000 bid.
Welcome to the Legacy of Agriculture. This program will explore the past, present, and future of agriculture. We'll look at the people, products, and events that have formed its history. And now with today's guest, your host, Chris Bair.
Good morning, everybody. This is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. We appreciate all of our listeners joining us on the radio station and also on Apple and Spotify. Today, my guest is Kevin Moe from NBO right here in Yankton, good old Yankton, South Dakota. Kevin, I know that you're in the renewal season as a banker. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us here at the radio station.
Absolutely. Appreciate the opportunity to visit.
You're a good old farm boy. You were raised in central South Dakota and dirt under your fingernails and cow manure on your boots type guy, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, born and raised in Woonsocket, South Dakota. And let's not remiss, I've hoed and picked many a watermelon back in the day as well. Our farm was actually a mile closer to Forsberg. With an address of Woonsocket. So lots of good memories growing up.
So our listeners that are not familiar with Woonsocket, South Dakota, and interesting that we're going off in this direction, there's a lot of, and people don't know this, there's a lot of watermelons a lot of melons, period, that is grown in that greater Woonsocket area, some of the best in the nation.
It is. It's really, and it's like, if you know, right? And it's really a soil complex. Really, it's kind of a sandy soil with a clay underbase, and the weather patterns just lean towards a really good melon growing opportunity, and it's just always been there. Kind of radiated in the Forsberg area, but certainly well into the Woonsocket and south of Woonsocket. A lot of watermelons grown for individuals and grocery stores, and it's been a generational opportunity there. So
you've been a banker for how many years?
Well, I hate to admit, but I'm in my 30th year of working in the banking industry.
3 decades. So tell us a little bit, tell our listeners a little bit about your upbringing in agriculture. You were born and raised on a farm in the good old state of South Dakota. And how in the world did you get from good old farm boy to banker?
Yeah, sometimes I wonder. But at the same point in time, when you look back reflectively, I was growing up at the farm, as you alluded to. My time period in the trajectory of agriculture was unique. So I was in my, early teens growing up during the farm crisis.
Right.
And so, that was really and agriculture is the number one business in the state for a reason, right? We have just really created this. We feed the world. Yet at the same point in time, that time period was really challenging. And so, how did that path happen? A lot of it was my mother was a lifelong elementary teacher, and really encouraged education. And it wasn't about, are you going to school? It's where are you going to school after high school? And so, going off to my undergrad, working at schooling at SDSU, all of a sudden, banking. Like, how about agricultural banking, right? I mean, it was an opportunity to still have a really great dialogue in the agricultural industry, but if you will, literally going to the other side of the desk in a way. And so that's where I landed, and it seems amazing to look back now, almost 30 years of that journey. It's been really impactful for me.
So what was it like growing up on a South Dakota farm? A ranching and farming, both.
Yeah, we were a little both, right? I mean, we're that unique operation, which you kind of don't see today. At the time, it was row crop, growing for feed. It was cow-calf. Dad would background cattle from time to time, and we had 3 pens of feeder hogs that were outside, right?
Right.
And so it was, chores from here and there. Grinding corn to feed the pigs is what I probably remember the most. And the good old fashioned, someone needs to scoop out the bunks, right?
You did it the hard way.
And at the same time, being involved, with my younger brother, with respect to the cow-calf operation. And I can so remember, this time of year, right? Where you're helping the feed, a little soon for calving, but I can so remember, calves in the basement, we're bringing them in.
Bring them inside and when it's cold.
And absolutely. And so, I mean, those are just, I think memories I not only treasure, but I keep in mind when we're having conversations with our ag relationships today, right?
it provides you to have a tremendous amount of empathy, which is much more important than sympathy. A tremendous amount of empathy for your producers and what they're doing out in the cold and in the calving season. What are some of your most favorite memories of being raised on the farm?
Great question. It's so hard. I get that question from my kids. What was it like, Dad? Right?
Back in the old days.
Yeah, and it's really hard to encapsulate into one, right? I mean,
you could quantify it by saying, yes, we had electricity and we had running water, kids.
And yes, we had 3 channels that we had to move the antenna and it wasn't no guarantee we were going to get them all, right?
That's right.
But
the channel remote was whichever kid was 2 years old to 10 years old living at home at the time. That was the remote, right?
I used to joke, my remote, his name was Kurt. He was my little brother, right? Go change the channel. No,
I my little sister and I, we always, my dad would always sit in the chair, and there was quite a few years between my older siblings and I, but my little sister and I were only about 2 years apart from each other, and Dad would say, change the channel. And we'd look at each other and we'd argue who was going to have to get out off the floor to get up to change the channel, right?
Yeah.
That was the remote.
Oh, right on.
So, I didn't mean to get off track there, but that was funny.
But I will attempt to answer that question, and this might be an oversimplistic, heartwarming one, but there's something about the memory when you're out doing those chores in the coveralls in January. We would come in, and Mom has that warm meal around the kitchen table, and you're ready, you're cold, and there's just something about that moment, right, that you would love to be able to replicate.
Oh, absolutely. That's and I can remember as well as a kid on Christmas morning, my dad had a rule. We did not do Christmas until the chores were done. The horses had to be fed, and I didn't have cattle. My dad didn't have cattle in my later teenage years, but certainly in the earlier years of my life, I could remember my dad would say, yeah, the chores have got to be done. We got to make sure that the animals got water, that the water troughs are thawed out, and then once the animals are fed, and even the dogs, you got to feed the dog, then we're going to come in and we'll have breakfast and start our Christmas morning. So it's interesting being raised on a farm for sure. What do you think is one of your toughest memories of being raised on the farm?
Well, I think time. I mean, what I'm getting at is you have an event, and I think that's the hard way to articulate to folks about commitment to agriculture, right? Is you just said it. Cattle need to be fed every day, right?
Absolutely.
And there are things that just have to be done regardless of a holiday, regardless of a program, regardless of that's what comes to mind. Like, we are all set to go. It might be a game, whatever it might be, but you walk outside and I don't think the hogs are supposed to be in the garden, right? Or
right.
Or the cattle are out, or you get the call, or the neighbor's cattle are out, because this is a team. That's one thing. Another thing about agriculture, it's a team sport, right?
Absolutely.
And so you don't drive by, you help your neighbor, and so not so much that it's hard, but it was I hope that kind of makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting being a farm kid, because you look at responsibility sometimes a little bit different than the rest of the world looks at responsibilities, because those are living, breathing creatures that are out there that have just as much need as you and I do as human beings. But folks, we're coming to the end of our first segment. My good friend, Kevin Moe, has joined us from FNBO Bank. We appreciate him taking time out of his very, very busy schedule. For those of you that are joining us on the radio or you miss the radio show every Saturday morning, you can join us on Apple or Spotify, and now YouTube. We're on YouTube, and you can join us there. We appreciate our good sponsor, Pfeiffer Auction and Realty. For more information, go to Pfeiffers.com for the upcoming 2024 auctions.
This is Kyle, Equipment Sales Representative with Pfeiffer's Auction and Realty. Pfeiffer's is proud to provide the best seller experience around. From start to finish, our trained equipment representatives will make sure the right decisions are made to get the most money from your new or used equipment. We believe that knowledge is power, and our reps provide you with the current market estimates to help better understand machinery values. If you want to sell machinery, then nobody does it better.
Good morning, everybody. This is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. We're coming into our second segment, and my good friend and I can't say coworker, but you were a client of ours, Kevin Moe, has joined me in studio today to record. We've got some exciting news, Kevin. So far on this radio show, we're in our 25th, close to our 30th episode. Is we are now, and you'll notice that we are recording live audio and video because we now have a YouTube channel. And so those of you that can't listen to the whole show or want to go find another place to see us or to listen to us, go to Legacy of Agriculture on YouTube. So that's an exciting announcement that we have, Kevin, and you're part of that announcement here.
It is exciting. As I joked earlier, I have a face for radio, so I'm a little nervous about adding the camera to that. I'm not sure if today's the right episode.
The bad thing is I have to shave and I have to comb my hair before I come and do do these shows before when you're all audio and when you say that we have a face just for radio, maybe it's a little bit dicey now that we're recording the video or via video as well. But we appreciate you for joining us. In our first segment, we talked about a little bit about being raised on the farm. I want to dive into. You talked a little bit about the farm crisis in the 80s, and in the 1970s, agriculture had hit an all-time high. Production was up. Production agriculture had made good money, and they did very, very well. And then we had a couple of worldwide events that kind of crashed agriculture for about a decade. And the Russian grain embargo started that, where we couldn't export. We were producing so much wheat at the time, and we had so many dry farms here in the United States and Canada, really all throughout North America. There was the great grain embargo, and it crashed agriculture. And then the second thing that really hurt was as interest rates grew. And to our younger listening audience, we had interest rates as high as 18%. On operating loans, which was absolutely devastating. It just didn't seem like agriculture could normalize during the 80s until the latter part of the 80s. And so there was just a lot of turnover in agriculture and production agriculture. And the banker was not a good name on the street during the 80s because there that difficult time. But I've in my career, being in the auction industry, I always wanted to know what it looked like from the banker side of the desk. When you have a producer or a client that comes in that wants to increase the size of their operation, there really is, and I had to learn this, there really is a business side of it where you have to meet certain criteria in order to borrow money from a bank. But there's also the emotional and the empathy that goes along with being a banker. So tell us a little bit what it's like to sit on that side of the desk.
Well, I could go on for a long time. I mean, it's when you look back and let's take a little reflective look at the 80s, right? And so clearly those world events created a ripple to the sector. And so whenever there's a crisis like that, it's not just the sector that gets exposed. Banking got exposed, right? And what I mean by that is how things were underwritten, structured, right? And so real fast, we pay a really expensive tuition, right? But
yes.
Holistically, industries learn from that. And so does that mean we're perfect? No, but I mean we learn from it, right? And so what I've really noticed as we go through time, and then you touched on interest rates, which is unique, right? We've had this jump in interest rates now, dramatic, really volatile jump.
Right.
We were at 3.25% for the longest time, Wall Street Journal Prime. Today it's 8.5%. And as you alluded to, I remember in banking when Wall Street Journal Prime wasn't double digits. Like, I think confetti dropped in the lobby, right? when rates were finally dropping. And so that brings a unique conversation piece, Chris. So if you think about that, if you look back just over like maybe the last 15 years, for example, we have been, call it the dot-com. Remember the dot-com, in the early 2000s? We had the financial crisis in the 2008, through the 10, and then now we lead up to this. So we've had this really unprecedented low interest rate environment for really an extended time period. And then boom, a little over a year ago, we have this spike. And so what I'm getting at is that's created some really good dialogue. So if you think through this, if you've been a producer and you've ran an operation for 15 years, you've never had to manage an upward interest rate environment before.
That is correct, yes.
But also, guess what? Your ag lender or ag relationship person that's been doing it for 15 years hasn't either.
That is true.
What we're very keenly aware of. And that's where I think, I look back reflectively of the organizations I've been able to work for over my 30 years, and I couldn't be more prouder of the one I'm part of now at FNBO. But within that, we recognize that, right? We're keenly aware of we try to learn, right, from the past, if you will, and then ensure through those conversations when we're talking with teams, things we need to be aware of, or things that we need to be bringing up, right, in the conversation piece to add that kind of value. And so I sure hope that I didn't nerd out too much there.
No,
that makes some sense.
That is very interesting because that is true. Over the last really decade and a half, we've enjoyed the lowest interest rates in history. And of course, the best place to be is if you don't have to pay that expense, that interest expense. But unfortunately, in agriculture, you have to grow and you have to acquire more land. And oftentimes you have to have an operating loan. So that greatly affects your ability to manage your money. And it completely changes the picture when interest rate increases by 1 point, by 1%, as we call it on the street. And so what has been your most rewarding experience in the baking industry?
Well, I think I'll try to summarize this quickly, but I remember about 10 years ago, I wish I could regurgitate who it was in a leadership meeting, and there was a survey that was done on the broad public, all sectors, just kind of a broad survey. And it said, what's the number one reason people go into banking? And what do you think the answer to that was?
I don't know.
The number one answer was to make money, right? I mean, there's that connotation. And then the same survey was done broadly across all the folks that work in the banking industry. What do you think the number one answer was?
Tell me.
To help people.
Okay.
Because when you go through that, and that's where I see that. I have such a great seat right now to watch that kind of holistic partnership. It's really a partnership, right? I mean, you talk about the emotional part. It's really hard. Commercial businesses have an emotional component by all means, but agriculture is this way of life, right? And,
yes.
And so in a generational aspect, and so when you are working and you watch and you see someone's short or long-term goals, and then you're able to watch it happen, or a passing of the baton, right, within the operation. I mean, those are just wins that are really hard to quantify, right?
Yes.
And sometimes you talk about the difficult, crucial conversations where we've had moments in agriculture, not to the depth of the 80s financial crisis, right, where real tough decisions have to be made, and they're mutual ones. They need to be partnership ones, and when you make those, and then you see it works, right? I mean, and it's just hard to kind of really quantify that type of success, but I would say that structured or thoughtful growth, and when you see it come together and in the synergies, and it's pretty exciting.
That really is, and I like the idea of that partnership and helping each other out. That's got to be very, very rewarding.
Mm-hmm. It really is. It's always about the relationship. Almost any business, when you think about it. Don't get me wrong, interest rate's important. A cost is important, right? We
Absolutely.
Need to be mindful of that.
Yes.
But we just find the value is when we're that partnership piece.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Kevin, and I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. We're coming down to the end of our second segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. I'm your host, Chris Bair. I appreciate Pifer Auction and Realty for being a great sponsor of the Legacy of Agriculture program. We appreciate the good people at Pifer's. For a complete schedule of both the land and the equipment auctions in the spring of 2024, go to their website at pifers.com. That's PIFERS.com, or call us 605-836-2277. Nobody does it better.
This is Jasmine with Pfeiffer's Auction and Realty. We have a great lineup of machinery and farm sales this spring. Many of them already have listings available on our website. If you're looking to buy land or machinery, go to www.pfeifers.com to see a complete catalog of our auctions. It's updated daily, so make sure to check back in with us and find the perfect lot for you. When it comes to auctions, nobody does it better.
Good morning, everybody. This is your host, Chris Bair of the Legacy of Agriculture. Kevin Moe from FNBO Bank has joined us in studio right here in good old Yankton, South Dakota. Kevin, thank you for joining us. Mm-hmm. We've had a great first couple of segments talking about everything from your upbringing on a South Dakota farm to transitioning through your post-high school education and at SDSU. And SDSU has a pretty impressive football team the last couple of years.
They do, and it's been a ton of fun. We look forward to that journey to continue.
That's exactly right. Now, your official title at FNBO is Regional Credit Policy Officer. Mm-hmm. Define that for me. What does that mean?
I'll attempt to define that. To really synthesize it, I work with our ag and commercial teams and our footprints in South Dakota, Illinois, and central Nebraska. And so I love it. You're able to have these dialogues with different type of operations, and you start talking about those areas. Like our South Dakota footprint, 80+% of that's production agriculture, right?
Yes.
And so really seeing these case by case, different geography. A row crop farm here is different than a row crop farm there, right? And so
yes.
A cow-calf operation, you name it. And so I really enjoy that. And I am so blessed to do it from Yankton, South Dakota, right? To work with those teams.
Not only that, but you understand it. You understand the culture, the agricultural culture, and being able to combine your upbringing with your professional career, and so that creates a great combination to be very successful in the career that you've and over 30 years. I think we talked about that in our first segment. So I'm going to give you some interesting statistics about South Dakota agriculture, and I'm going to get in trouble saying this because we're really kind of a nationwide program, and but I want to talk about South Dakota. And we're going to do a show a little later in the spring where we're going to combine the statistics from all of the upper Midwest. But in the state of South Dakota, there's over 29,000 farming operations. There's over 43 million acres that are operated in the state of South Dakota. Do you know how many beef cows there are? Just cows.
Just cows.
Just cows. 1.5 million.
Okay.
1.5 million, and just over 2 million hogs, and milk production measured in dollars is just over $1 billion in milk just in the state of South Dakota. And these numbers come from the USDA in the 2017 census. So I'm sure that these numbers have changed a fair amount. But for example, there's almost 6 million acres that are planted to corn in South Dakota every year. Just over 5 million acres just in soybeans. So between the two of them, there's right around 11 million acres of the 43 million total acres. So a fourth of our production comes from corn and soybeans. So it makes sense that we protect that portion of our agriculture here in South Dakota, and having farmers that are properly producers, that are properly financed and situated financially in a positive position, that really becomes the banker's responsibility. What does that look like?
Well, and let's extend that further. There's 900,000 people in the state, right?
Correct.
And so sometimes through our travels, we have those conversations. I alluded earlier, I spend time in Illinois from time to time, and you have these different conversations. So you start backing in, and I was actually doing it in my mind. I'm like going, I've done the cow thing, but I'm thinking of hooves versus feet.
That's
in
right.
Our state, right?
Correct.
And it's just it's astronomical, the amount of livestock, and when you start backing into those numbers. And so that leads into something we talked about earlier. It's what, agriculture is the number one business, and you just quantified why it is, right, in our state and region.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I can't emphasize enough where does that align to banking, right? Is this unique partnership that we feed the world, We don't in South Dakota. Let's back into that. With 900,000 people, do we eat all that? No,
absolutely not.
Do our livestock use a big part of it? Yes,
part of it, yes.
But we are definitely export driven, right?
That is correct,
and the demand is there. And that's not just a demand. I would have quantified as actually kind of a responsibility, right, that we have, that our farmers take pride in, our producers take pride in, and welcome that. And so it creates a unique dialogue. I really enjoyed listening to WNAX on a drive earlier this week where you were having a conversation about the strength of the dollar and what that does to exports. That's an important conversation piece for
sure.
The amount of corn, the ethanol that we produce in this country, right? And so we are a world market, and at the same time, it creates this great opportunity from a banking conversation, a partnership standpoint to position that kind of growth.
Oftentimes, people in agriculture, I know that have fallen victim to this. Is when I think of banking and agriculture, I always think of banking as a medium that a producer goes in to borrow money, and that's not necessarily the case. When we talk about agriculture and banking, oftentimes we're talking about farmers that have done well, producers that have done well, that want to go and invest money. They need a place to park their money. They need a place to deposit their money. They need a place to withdraw their money. They need some help managing the money, and that's where the bank comes into. It's not just about, I need to go borrow X number of dollars from the bank. Is that right, Kevin?
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, that's kind of the driving factor. For a reason. That's why most people go there, right? I mean, think about the cost, the capital. It's a bit of a challenge, actually, the capital intense to buy a quarter of land today, right?
Sure.
And so there are folks, tons of them, and this well in the auction industry, that they're deploying cash, right? But many are needing that partnership to come in and to order to buy that quarter next door to the home place, which is part of a dream, right?
Correct.
And so those are those kind of success pieces. And then within that, and that's what's new to this upward interest rate environment, right? I hate to sound bad, but for almost 15 years, I won't say folks didn't care, but they weren't as in tune to, am I going to get 0.005% in my savings account? Right? And now with folks that have liquidity, now there's a far more elevated conversation piece on the deposit side.
Yeah, you are right, Kevin. Hey, folks, we're coming down to the end of our third segment in the Legacy of Agriculture. I'm Chris Bair, the host of the Legacy of Agriculture. You can join us on Apple and Spotify and now YouTube. We just started a brand new YouTube channel called The Legacy of Agriculture. Come and join us. We appreciate as always, we appreciate our sponsor, Pifer Auction and Realty, for a complete listing of the auctions coming in 2024. Pifers.com, or call us 605-836-2277. Nobody does it better.
This is Kyle, equipment sales representative with Pifer's Auction and Realty. Pifer's is proud to provide the best seller experience around. From start to finish, our trained equipment representatives will make sure the right decisions are made to get the most money from your new or used equipment. We believe that knowledge is power, and our reps provide you with the current market estimates to help better understand machinery values. If you want to sell machinery, then nobody does it better.
Good morning, everybody. This is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture, and Kevin Moe from FNBO Bank has joined me on this kind of rainy, wet, heavy, late. I don't even know. We're not even late winter yet.
Yeah.
Let's just say early spring, way early spring, is joining us here in studio, and I appreciate Kevin for taking time out of his busy schedule. We've had a great 3 segments, Kevin, but I have a soft spot in my heart for young people. As we have talked about in previous segments, 150 years ago, 90% of the population in the United States was engaged in agriculture. It took 90% of the population to grow enough food to feed the population and part of the world. Now we're looking at less than 2% of the population that is now feeding the world. And the big question as farms continue to grow, and we always say corporate farms, and has a negative connotation, but we have to feed the world. But the family farms are growing as well. The mom and pop operations, we're seeing 3, 4, 5 generation farms now that started on a quarter, half section or section that now are farm thousands of acres. Kevin, from a banker's perspective, how do we keep and engage the young people? What would you say from a banker's perspective if you have a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old young man that it maybe grandpa farm, but there's not room? How do we keep those type of people that want to be engaged in agriculture?
Yeah. And I think part of it leads to the, it's there's a kind of this undertone saying I've heard from time to time that you can make money farming, but it's hard to make a living farming, right? And
Yes.
I don't mean to point that directly to you, what you're coining as a mom and pop, but the best thing that's happened about the demand piece of feeding the world, right, and this unique rise in economic impact, if you will, is it creates a barrier too.
Right.
So the cost to entry is really high. I wish I had a great answer.
And
for
risky.
you. Yeah. Because
Very
of
risky.
that, right? The cost of whether you're going to rent land or especially if you're going to try to acquire real estate. But at the same point in time, a bred cow herd, if you will, or a planter, right? I mean, just think through the cost of that. Right. And so don't get me wrong, Farm Service Agency has some wonderful programs that we've partnered with over the years, specific to that, if you will, beginning farmer program. At the same time, those barriers are real and they're there because of success. I mean, I know it sounds kind of odd, but it's created this economies of scale, which inadvertently has kind of made it a little harder to just, you don't get to sleep at Holiday Inn Express last night and say, I want to be a farmer tomorrow. Right.
That's right.
I mean, I hope that kind of made sense a little bit.
So what advice would you give to the young man that is growing up on the farm that will probably exit production agriculture that wants to get into ag banking? What advice would you give him?
Well, I think now we're going to talk about the first segment, right? Sometimes that's what we're
gotta
talking
do a
about,
loop, right?
Is for me, it becoming an agricultural lender, right?
Right.
And so, and that's what's unique. We're honing in on production ag here, but at the same time, that success is also at the local co-op, right?
Yes.
The seed dealer, the chemical dealer, right?
Yes.
And I'm telling you, those career opportunities are fantastic, right? And you are very attuned to that emotional type way of life, right?
Yes.
Those kind of opportunities. And I would suggest that's different today than it was in the farm crisis in the 1980s. Right?
That is correct.
And so that's pretty exciting. I mean, to me, to have that conversation with that 17-year-old, that's what we're kind of talking about. And it doesn't mean you can't still be doing things within production ag as well.
And the auction industry is actually the same way, Kevin, is as we're always looking for young men that have and women that are coming off the farm that want to enter into the auction industry or anything that touches agriculture, is what you've said, is there is great opportunity for good help. I can't tell you how many dealerships, and it doesn't matter if it's a John Deere or Case International or Fendt or whoever it is, that is anxiously engaged in promoting people, young kids off the farm because they have one thing that they really like, and it's their ethic. It's their work ethic and how they think that they're after that allows them to become great employees or partners in other aspects of production agriculture. Would you agree?
I would. Literally Tuesday night, attending an annual event for a nonprofit organization, really impactful one that we do some work with, sitting right next to a gentleman that is a sales manager for an implement dealership. We're having this conversation about my son is a junior at South Dakota State University, third generation Jack, right? And right away he goes, we have an internship for our sales program at our implement dealer. Would he want to have a conversation around that, right? And I mean, that's an example right there about those kind of opportunities that are there today.
I remember when growing up on the farm, and I've said this on my shows in the past, is when I was going to college, I was having a conversation with a gentleman, and I said, I says, I'm going to step away from the production agriculture because I love machinery. Machinery and land was my passion, and production agriculture to me was so important. But he said, he says, I'll tell you something about agriculture. He says, you and I can do without a car. You and I can do without a new television. We can do without the many of the niceties that we have. And believe it or not, we could probably do without a cell phone, surprisingly enough. But you and I are going to do what it takes to put food on the table. And people have to eat every single day. And there will always be work in agriculture because everybody has to eat every single day.
Well, and I think we saw an awareness factor in that. And we're not here to talk about COVID, but remember when we went to the store and the shelf wasn't full?
That's exactly right.
Right?
Sure.
There was an expectation, and
remember the toilet paper and the paper towels and the cleaning supplies.
There's no eggs today, right? You know what I mean? And I think that was maybe across the country a bit of a eye opener a little bit about we use words like supply chain, but we tend to as a society have been very fortunate in our generational performance as a country that we just expect when we go to the grocery store that there's going to be eggs there. Right.
Sure.
And so how important that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, and it's important also in the aspect of agriculture, whether you want to be in production agriculture or whether you want to be in banking or seed or chemicals, to go and get a good education. And it doesn't have to be at a fancy school either. It can be your local. You can get just as good education at some of your local schools as you can going to a big name school, and that's been proven in the last decade or so.
Oh, look at the offerings within our state. From a technical standpoint, we have some of the best in the country right here in South Dakota. And so I couldn't agree more. That education piece, it just creates, and also it's not about being the straight A student either. Don't get me wrong. I mean, but it's more about having this thinking pattern. How do I approach things differently, perhaps? Yep.
You are right. Unfortunately, Kevin, we're coming down to the end of our fourth segment. Thank you so much for joining us and being part of the Legacy of Agriculture. That's what we're all about, is telling people's story. And thank you for sharing such an important, intimate part of your life in agriculture and in the banking industry. Folks, this is Chris Bair with the Legacy of Agriculture. We appreciate our sponsor, Pifer Auction and Realty. Pifers.com is where you'll want to go to get the spring of 2024 list of auctions, land auctions, and equipment auctions, or call us 605-836-2277.
And here now, I'm going to do now. I'm going to bid on here now. Who bid $500,000 bid?
We hope you've enjoyed today's edition of The Legacy of Agriculture with Chris Bair, sponsored by Pifer's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Call Pifer's at 605-836-2277.